Chapter 1. Shadows in Paradise. The sun, like a benevolent elder, painted the small farming town of St. Mary in hues of gold. Rustling banana leaves whispered secrets, and children's laughter echoed across fields where sugarcanes swayed. It was a haven, a place where time flowed like molasses and worries seemed distant as the horizon. Betty, her skin kissed by the sun, moved through her days with grace. Her kindness was legendary, woven into the very fabric of St. Mary. She tended to her modest home, its walls painted with memories, and waited for Alvin, the charismatic heartbeat of her life. Alvin, with eyes that held dreams, managed a bustling food distribution factory in Kingston. His work pulled him away, but his heart remained tethered to Betty. Together, they imagined a future, a chorus of children's laughter, mangoes plucked from their own trees, and evenings spent beneath the star-studded Jamaican sky. Yet paradise had its shadows. One evening, Alvin returned, his face etched with news. "Margaret," he said, and Betty's heart skipped a beat. His older sister, widowed by fate, would be staying with them. Margaret, with her sharp edges and hidden agendas, was a tempest waiting to disrupt their peace. Betty's gaze lingered on the mango tree outside, the same tree where she and Alvin had whispered promises. She wondered how its leaves would rustle now, bearing witness to Margaret's arrival. Shadows danced on the walls, and Betty's heart clenched. For in this idyllic corner of Jamaica, secrets and family ties tangled like vines, and Betty feared that Margaret's presence would cast a longer shadow than the mango trees ever could. Chapter 2. The Serpent in the Garden. Margaret arrived like a storm front, her presence casting shadows even in the sunniest corners of Alvin and Betty's home. Her air of superiority clung to her like the humidity in the air, a stifling weight that whispered, "I belong here more than you do." In her late 30s, Margaret had never known the sweat of honest labor. Her existence had been cushioned by her late husband's earnings, and she wore privilege like a silken gown. From the moment she crossed their threshold, she set her sights on Betty, the gentle heart who tended to the home with unwavering dedication. Margaret's attacks were subtle, like the bite of a mosquito, an irritation that left a lingering itch. She'd critique Betty's homemaking skills, her words like tiny stings. "Alvin deserves better," she'd imply, her smile a thin crescent moon. "You're too sensitive, Betty. I'm only trying to help." Betty, normally resilient as the guava trees outside, found herself unraveling. Doubt crept in like a creeping vine. Was she truly inadequate? Was Alvin secretly longing for more? Alvin, his love for Betty, etched in every line of his face, struggled to see through Margaret's veil. He'd charm Betty with promises that Margaret's stay was temporary, that her barbs would dull with time. But the serpent had slithered into their paradise, and its venom seeped deeper each day. The tension thickened like the air before a thunderstorm. Margaret's whispers grew darker. "A man like Alvin," she'd insinuate, her voice a venomous murmur, "needs a woman who can keep him satisfied." Betty's nights became restless. She'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was failing her husband. Alvin, oblivious to the serpent's coils, would hold her close, murmuring soothing words. "Trust me, my love," he'd say. "Margaret will soon shed her skin and move on." But Betty knew better. The serpent had sunk its fangs deep, and paradise trembled under its weight. Chapter 3. a heart of darkness. The sun still painted the banana leaves gold, but shadows crept into Alvin and Betty's home. Margaret, like a relentless storm, tightened her grip. Her whispers, sharp as machete blades, sliced through their peace. Weeks passed, and Margaret's oppression grew. She planted seeds of doubt in Alvin's mind, insidious and deliberate. "Betty," she'd say, her tone casual as a breeze, "has been awfully friendly with that young man down the road." Alvin's thoughts churned like the nearby river, doubt, suspicion, and jealousy swirling in murky currents. But the cruelest blow came when Margaret mocked Betty's humble origins. "You've done well for yourself," she sneered, her eyes cold as the moonless night. "Coming from nothing. But remember, Alvin comes from better stock." The words cut Betty to her core, leaving wounds that bled silently. Alvin, torn between love and loyalty, tried to mediate. He held Betty's trembling hands, his voice a fragile reed. "My heart belongs to you," he'd whisper. "Margaret's words are poison." Yet the damage was done. The cracks in their marriage, once invisible, now gaped wide. Betty, her spirit like a battered mango tree, wondered if love could withstand such darkness. Alvin, caught in the crossfire, felt the weight of family ties strangle his resolve. Outside, the mango tree stood witness. Its leaves rustled secrets, the ones whispered by the wind and the ones buried deep within hearts. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, Alvin and Betty faced their heart of darkness, a serpent named Margaret, coiled and ready to strike. Chapter 4. Secrets Unveiled. Betty and Alvin's world teetered on the edge, a fragile mango, ripe yet threatened by unseen winds. But just when despair seemed insurmountable, a revelation thundered through their lives like a tropical storm. Margaret, her facade now as brittle as dried palm fronds, had spun a web of deceit. Henry, her supposedly deceased husband, was very much alive. He'd abandoned her for a younger flame in England, leaving Margaret with nothing but the echoes of betrayal. The news, when it finally reached Jamaica, shattered her carefully constructed illusion. Envy and bitterness, like twin demons, gnawed at Margaret's soul. Betty's stable marriage, a beacon of love and resilience, became a constant reminder of what she'd lost. The mango tree outside their window, its leaves rustling secrets, bore witness to Margaret's unraveling. In desperation, Margaret shed her subtlety. Her antagonism toward Betty grew overt, reckless. She'd linger near the kitchen, eyes narrowed, as Betty stirred pots of callaloo. "You're lucky," Margaret would hiss, her voice a venomous serpent. "Your Alvin stays with you." Betty points towards the front door. "Go, I'm sure you don't need my assistance." Betty, her belly now cradling new life, clung to hope. The doctor's words, the confirmation of pregnancy, were a lifeline. Joy tiptoed back into their home, fragile as a butterfly's wing. For a moment, it seemed their love could conquer all. The serpent's venom diluted by the promise of a child. But the mango tree knew better. Its roots reached deep, tapping into the earth's ancient wisdom. It whispered to Betty and Alvin, secrets unveiled could heal or destroy. And as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows, they faced a choice: to nurture their love or let it wither like fallen fruit. In St. Mary, where the air smelled of ripe mangoes and the river murmured forgotten tales, their hearts hung in delicate balance. Chapter 5. Beneath the mango tree. Margaret's departure had been a tempest. Her anger, like a gusty wind, had swept through their modest home, leaving behind shards of broken memories. But Alvin and Betty, seasoned by years of shared laughter and whispered secrets, were determined to stitch their joy back together. One warm afternoon, Betty set off for the bustling market square. The sun painted her skin a deeper shade of brown, and her steps carried the weight of unspoken worries. She needed provisions for the evening meal, a simple feast of yams, okra, and a dash of hope. As Betty weaved through the market stalls, she glimpsed Margaret, a shadow of her former self, locked in a heated exchange with the vegetable vendor. Margaret's eyes blazed with defiance, but her threadbare dress betrayed her desperation. The vendor accused her of pilfering a few scallions, and Betty knew he spoke the truth. Yet, compassion tugged at her heart. Betty stepped forward, her voice firm but gentle. "Mr. Johnson," she addressed the vendor, "perhaps our friend Margaret simply forgot to pay. We all have our forgetful moments, don't we?" Mr. Johnson scowled, his bushy eyebrows knitting together. "Betty, I've got a business to run. Can't afford to be lenient." Betty's eyes met Margaret's. She saw hunger etched there, the hunger for more than just food. So she played her part. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her tone unwavering, "you're mistaken. Margaret wouldn't steal. Let's not tarnish her pride." Margaret shuffled away, still protesting, and Betty followed her. They walked past the mango tree, the one that had witnessed countless secrets and whispered promises. Betty slipped a few coins into Margaret's hand, unseen by prying eyes. "Take this," she said softly. "Clear your debt." Margaret's eyes welled up, gratitude and shame warring within her. "Why, Betty? Why help me?" "Because," Betty replied, "we're all threads in the same patchwork quilt. When one unravels, we all feel the chill." Days passed, and Margaret's debt remained a secret between the mango tree and Betty's heart. Then one evening, Margaret appeared at their doorstep, bearing a humble offering, a pot of steaming callaloo soup, fragrant with time and memories. Alvin eyed it warily, but Betty welcomed it with open arms. They sat around the worn wooden table, the three of them, sharing stories of childhood escapades, of mango fights under the scorching sun, and of dreams woven into the fabric of their lives. The soup warmed their bellies, but it was the laughter that thawed their souls. As the sun dipped below the hills, casting a golden glow over their little home, Alvin reached for Betty's hand. "Maybe," he said, "we can mend more than just our joy." And beneath the mango tree's sprawling branches, they vowed to weave their love anew, a tapestry of forgiveness, kindness, and shared meals. For in that small farming town, where time moved like molasses, they understood that sometimes healing came in the form of secret debts cleared and peacemaking meals shared. Chapter 6. Beneath the mango tree's watchful leaves. In that sun-drenched Jamaican village, where time flowed like molasses and secrets whispered through the mango leaves, Alvin, Betty, and Margaret tiptoed toward reconciliation. Trust, fragile as a butterfly's wing, began to flutter back into their lives. Margaret, her eyes softened by remorse, extended an olive branch, an invitation to the river. "Betty," she said, "let's return to our childhood haunt, where the water sings and memories ripple." Alvin, ever the cautious guardian, raised an eyebrow. "Margaret," he said, "don't you see? Betty's carrying life within her. How will she manage the water?" Margaret laughed. "Alvin," she retorted, "I've swum in English lakes and Jamaican coves. I earned my 1,000-meter badge, you know." Alvin's skepticism clung like morning dew. "Old lessons," he muttered. "And Betty, you promised to stay close to the bank?" Betty, her belly round as a ripe ackee, nodded. "I'll dip my toes, Alvin, no deeper." So they set off, the duo past the guava groves, along the winding path, until the river's song grew louder. The water, cool and inviting, cradled their memories. Margaret and Betty waded in, their laughter echoing off the mossy stones. Hours slipped by, and the sun dipped low, casting golden nets across the water. But Alvin's heart clenched. Where were they? Panic gnawed at him like a hungry mongoose. He beckoned a local child, eyes wide with curiosity. "Have you seen Betty?" he asked. The child shook her head. "No, Mr. Alvin, but saw her scarf on the riverbank. I thought it was strange because she rarely comes here." Alvin's breath hitched. He examined the scarf, a familiar weave, Betty's favorite. "Go home," he told the child, his voice brittle, "and pray." With a torch and a rope, Alvin raced toward the river. Halfway down the lane, he glimpsed them, Margaret and Betty, arms linked, laughter bubbling like spring water. Relief flooded Alvin. "Where were you?" he scolded, but his eyes held tears. "You had me fearing the worst." Margaret grinned, unrepentant. "We lost track of time," she said. "Betty's stories are like hidden treasure." Betty, her cheeks flushed, added, "And Margaret's swimming skills, impeccable." They walked back together. The three of them, Alvin's stern words melted into gratitude, for in that fading light, trust was stitched anew, and the river whispered forgiveness. And as they reached home, Alvin couldn't help but smile. "Next time," he teased, "I'll bring a lifebuoy." Margaret laughed. Betty beamed. Chapter 7. Beneath the mango tree's urgent shadows. In that sun-soaked Jamaican village, where the air smelled of ripe mangoes and secrets whispered through the swaying palms, Betty and Alvin leaned on Margaret's kindness. Her visits became a lifeline, especially now that Betty's belly swelled with life, a promise of new beginnings. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Betty noticed Margaret's glow. "You're radiant," Betty whispered. "What's your secret?" Margaret's eyes sparkled. "A new man," she confessed, "strong, rich, and handsome. Light years better than Henry ever was." Betty's laughter danced like a breeze. "Margaret," she said, "you deserve happiness. We all do." Margaret's gratitude shimmered in her tear-filled eyes. "Thank you, Betty." As evening painted the sky, Margaret prepared dinner, a fragrant pot of ackee and saltfish, steam rising like memories. Alvin, weary from his double shift at the food processing factory, washed off the day's sweat. The dining room welcomed them, their makeshift family, around the worn wooden table. "This is delicious," Alvin declared, savoring each bite. Betty nodded in agreement, her eyes on Margaret. They were a trio now, bound by shared meals and unspoken hopes. But fate, like a sudden storm, swept in. Betty's scream pierced the air. She clutched her stomach, doubled over in agony. Blood stained the floor, and panic clawed at Alvin's chest. "What's happening?" Alvin's voice cracked. Margaret, her face pale but resolute, sprang into action. "Towels!" she shouted. "Get towels from the cupboard." Outside, children played, oblivious to the drama unfolding. Margaret called to one, a messenger of urgency. "Fetch Mr. Chambers," she commanded. "Tell him to bring his car. Now." Mr. Chambers arrived, a sturdy man with kind eyes. Alvin and he carried Betty, her pain etched in every line of her face, to the waiting car. Margaret rode shotgun, her prayers whispered to the wind. The hospital loomed ahead, their beacon of hope. Alvin's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Betty's breaths came in ragged gasps. Margaret, her hands steady, held Betty's gaze. "Stay with us, Betty," Margaret urged. "We're almost there." And as the car sped through the night, beneath the mango trees' watchful shadows, Alvin's heart pounded. Margaret's newfound love, Betty's pain, and the road ahead, all tangled like vines in their shared history. In the hospital's fluorescent glow, doctors swarmed around Betty. Alvin paced, his prayers a litany. Margaret stood by, her radiant face now etched with worry. When the nurse emerged, her eyes somber, Alvin's world tilted. "It's serious, and it's not looking good for either of them," she said. "But we'll do our best." Margaret squeezed Alvin's hand. "We're here for her," she whispered. And so, beneath the flickering hospital lights, their makeshift family clung together, a trio bound by love, fear, and the promise of a fragile life.